Well, it is wonderful to be back. Excited to be speaking with you all once again. So calling this our spring update, although I'm a little ahead since it's not quite spring, although we are appreciating the increased daylight into the evening hours. I had to have a conversation with somebody recently to kind of remind them that the days have not actually gotten much longer. They usually get a minute or two longer. It's just that it's shifted, you know. So helpful reminder for some. So I'm Jamie Powers. I'm the Climate Action Program Manager in an interim role. And the last time I was here, one of the things I shared as project manager was that Gabe Daly was going to be departing the county. And he did so in December of 2024. And so I have been placed in the program manager role on an interim basis, and I can share more about that as we go. So quick run through the agenda. I provided a lot of context the last time I was here. Obviously, it was recorded, it's on the record, and so I'm not going to spend too much time there. But just for folks who may have missed some of that discussion, and if I felt like tonight's conversation would warrant a little bit of an emphasis on one piece of context or another, I will do that. I'll talk a little bit about climate action plan implementation in the county, reporting on our greenhouse gas emissions, and then the adaptation and resilience piece, which is also called for in the climate action plan. So to provide some context, I wanted to put in front of this group our mission statement. So the county's mission statement, which some of you may be familiar with, and then CVille 100, I took a sort of abridged version, just the sort of action piece of the mission statement. And I wanted to prime this meeting and this conversation with the question at the bottom, which is, what does climate change action mean to CVille members, thinking organizationally and as individuals? And it's not a question I'm trying to get an answer to in this moment, but it is one that I hope I can prime repeatedly throughout my presentation, as I have some thoughts on what might be helpful versions of climate action from the perspective of a government climate action program manager. So one piece that I wanted to review was kind of the how of how we do this work at the county, how my program does this work, and how we want to partner with folks. And so just to kind of highlight a few terms from in here, diversity, equity, inclusion, although under attack at the federal level, is still very much a part of our county values, and certainly something that I look for when I am trying to partner with different community members. So as we think about the ways that CVille 100 is doing climate action and facilitating climate action, I think it's really important to have as many different voices at the table as possible. In terms of integrity, my cat is just joining us. I don't know if you can see her yet, but I'm sure she'll be on my lap soon. In terms of the integrity value, you know, this is hard work, and this can be frustrating and daunting in a variety of different ways. But it's really important, obviously, that we have honest conversations with each other about where the challenges are and what needs to be done. This is a global challenge for generations, and so it is definitely going to require some innovation, creativity. As we think about the meaning of stewardship, I think it's important to remember that stewardship is always forward-looking. The work we are doing is for future generations. And so it's not necessarily about what benefits us today, but how we can set things up, set up a system that's going to benefit everybody moving forward. And then, of course, the importance of lifelong learning, not just in the sort of formal sense, but we're going to try some things, we're going to fail, and we're going to have to adapt and try something else. And so that's a really important part of this work, because it's hard, it's big, and it is long lasting. So just wanted to kind of call some of those values out for us today. In terms of implementation, again, some of this you saw in October when I visited you last, but I just wanted to take a moment here to remind the group of where our emissions are coming from historically and where we anticipate they're going to come from in the future. You can see a key down at the bottom. It might not be super clear because the writing is kind of small, but hopefully you can zoom in on the deck once I share it. So the biggest chunk of our emissions is probably always going to be the transportation sector. And so that's just something for CVIL 100 to keep in mind as you're thinking about the type of solutions that we need to be going after. That's always going to be where the stubborn work is. Buildings, there's a lot in the way markets are structured and people are thinking about buildings and energy use that is probably going to lead to that being a relatively easy lift compared to the other sectors. Not that we don't have work to do there, but that's not necessarily a place where we need to put like all hands on deck. Another area, if you go all the way over to the right, you'll see a lot of green. The reason for that is because the green above the zero line is agriculture. Agriculture is notably a stubborn place to create change in how crops are grown, livestock are tended to, things are transported, practices on the ground, et cetera. And so that's going to take a lot of focus, especially in a rural county like Albemarle. The green below the zero line is sequestration. That is land that is under permanent protection. So think about conservation easements as an example there. We really need to get that program back up and running and make sure we are putting land, both forest land and grasslands, into conservation so they can do their part to kind of bring us to net zero by 2050. And I did see something go in the chat. If it's time sensitive, please interrupt me and I'll pause, and if it's a question, I'll answer it. The one piece that I wanted to point out here, this light yellow area from 2022 to 2050 is essentially our cumulative emissions if we meet our SMART goal targets for 2030 and 2050. The important thing to call out here is that piece, the cumulative emissions, is what we send into the atmosphere over the long haul, right, between now and 2050. So it's totally reasonable that we could keep our emissions the same as they are today, all the way to 2045, and then do some deep work to bring our emissions down to zero in 5 years. That is one version of how we could handle a net zero emissions target. However, that would contribute way too much cumulative emissions. So as we think about the type of climate action that we need in the county, it is to bring our emissions down as fast as possible and as much as possible so that the overall impact over the next few decades is less. I know a lot of you think about this all the time, but especially for folks viewing on YouTube after the fact, I really wanted to hammer that point home. I touched on a lot of this the last time we met, and so this is just to remind folks how we prioritize our work. It's not just about the GHG reduction potential. It is also about other co-benefits. It's about advancing equity and about shifting systems so that we focus less on individual behaviors and more on changing the types of decisions that are available to folks. And I can give you some examples later on in the presentation. I wanted to pause here a little bit more. I went really fast through this in October. I wanted to pause in case folks wanted to dig into anything in particular here. One thing I wanted to mention about the emissions inventories, as you know from the Climate Action Plan, we are required to publish an inventory every 2 years on even, or the inventory relates to even numbered years. So we've done up to 2022. There's always a 2-year delay on federal data. And so we're always going to be 2 years behind. This year in 2025, we're actually going to be working on the 2023 inventory. So just to kind of contextualize that, a couple of important changes to look for in the inventories are, one, we need to get a handle on Amtrak, the airport, and wastewater plant. Those are not currently in the county's inventory, and we are looking for ways to make sure that those are incorporated so that we are we have integrity in terms of the type of data that we are accounting for. And the other big piece that you're going to see, hopefully this year, but certainly by next year, is alongside our normal county emissions inventory, where we're only concerned about things that are happening within our borders. we also want to start working on a consumption-based inventory, which takes into account all the things that we buy that are made elsewhere. And I can talk later, if necessary, about the importance of accounting for that. And so that's going to change probably pretty significantly the numbers, the raw numbers that are in the inventories, even going back a few years. But it will not change the end goal, which is getting to net zero emissions. We are finishing up our Community Climate Action Grant Program's second year. There's currently no plan to do a third year of that, just for funding limitation reasons. However, we are working with county leadership to see if leadership would be interested in actually expanding that program to be cross-departmental, so that we get out from under just the climate program. Cobb Fifth Street is moving along. We have a PPA and a lease signed, and so the development firm is doing a lot of work right now to kind of develop that project, start moving toward procurement. We anticipate by early 2026 that facility will be up and running. Some of you may have been in the audience when we talked about the solar ordinance. It was a lot of great community engagement during the solar ordinance conversation, and we're keeping an eye on that as we work our way toward the Board of Supervisors. I do see your hand, Randy, and just before I answer, the Energy Resource Hub, we just launched, I think a week or two ago at Carver Rec. Really exciting opportunity where folks can actually talk to a human who can walk them through various local, state, utility, and federal incentives that are available if you want to do something related to EVs, to a charger, energy efficiency at your home, putting solar on your home, all that sort of stuff. So I definitely recommend checking out the Energy Resource Hub when you have a moment. I think those are the main things I wanted to hit. Let me pause and take a question from Randy. Yes, sir.
COB?
Oh, sorry, County Office Building.
Okay. Because to me, COB is close of business.
Yes, that's right. I was a military man, and that's always what it meant to me. And now I've transitioned into this. We have two Cobbs, one on McIntyre, one on Fifth Street. Okay, and we can come back to questions pending time. The last point on implementation is just to stress again that this takes all of us, and I'll explain why in the next section of the presentation. But government can only do so much. The community, businesses, nonprofit organizations, individual residents even need to come together and figure out creative and bold ways to do climate action. And I know the folks in this call are ready and up for the challenge of helping to lead some of that work. All right, so real quickly on inventories, this is a basic sense of where our emissions are generally coming from. The biggest chunk, as I mentioned earlier, is transportation. A majority actually is coming from the combination of buildings and ag and landscape. And then a very small slice is from waste. And so that tends to inform what we are focused on in the climate program at the county. One thing that I included in October, but I just wanted to remind folks, according to our inventories, which again, so far only go up to 2022, we had been heading downward in the correct direction. We dipped in 2020 for obvious reasons. If they're not obvious, we can discuss on this call. And then we started to see emissions going up in the wrong direction. So not only have emissions for which we have accounted thus far, again, this doesn't include 23, 24, but for those emissions we've accounted for, we have been heading in the wrong direction. And even if we sort of like even out the trend over time, we are not on target to meet our 2030 goal of 45% reduction or our 2050 goal of zero net emissions. So a very important point to keep in mind here as we do this work. The reason why community is so important is because government operations emissions, these include schools, school buses, all of our fleet, all of our buildings. It's only 1.5% of our community-wide emissions. So the vast majority is out there beyond the government. So we do have an important role to lead by example in how we energize our buildings, how efficient we are, how we deal with fleet transition, all that sort of stuff. but the bulk of the work is out in the community. It's with people like you, and it's being led by organizations like yours. Adaptation and resilience. Here, again, adaptation is necessary because we assume that a lot of the impacts of climate change are baked into our future due to several decades of collective inaction to address the problem. Even though adaptation is a necessary part of the way forward, mitigation is still at the center of our strategy, and it needs to be the first resilience strategy, because it's kind of like turning off the gas. If you've got a fire, like the first thing you need to turn off the source of the fuel to the crisis, and then you can deal with the crisis, right? So that's something that we very much take to heart, is mitigation needs to be the focus while we also consider adaptation and resilience. Resilient Together is the main way that we are doing adaptation and resilience planning. You are all familiar with this project. This is a partnership with the city and UVA. I won't say too much about it. I will remind you that our version of adaptation is when you prepare in advance through the investments. If you look at the graph on the right, you make investments to adapt so that when the flood event happens, when the heat wave comes, when the drought happens, we are hit by that hazard, but we can bounce back in a way that actually allows us to return to at least where we were, if not to a better place. And so that graph on the right is how we think about adaptation and resilience, not the one on the left. This is kind of a map of where we are in our Resilient Together process. We are on step 3, the design phase right now. This will last probably until end of June, early July, somewhere in there, at which point we will go to the decide phase, which is actually writing the plan. You all will have a really important role to play in community engagement events that we're going to be announcing soon. Those events are going to be taking place, several events in April and May of this year. So keep your eyes out for those announcements. I talked about the climate resilience cohort at the last meeting, and this is a really important effort to center the voices of folks who have been marginalized for decades in a variety of community planning efforts. We received a grant from EPA of $460,000 to support this work, and we found out a week ago tomorrow that that grant has been terminated. And so we are trying to figure out next steps and how we can manage from here. This is important not just to the county, but also to the city and UVA. So again, stay tuned for what might happen to make sure we're able to center equity in this adaptation and resilience planning process. So big picture, moving forward, I'm an interim program manager, which means I have neither taken Gabe Daly's post, nor have I abdicated my former post, which means I cannot hire a second person until I'm no longer interim. And so this is, the timeline is unclear, but I am working internally to see what sort of clarity we can get there so that as soon as possible, we can hire a second climate team member. As I think I hinted at earlier, we are engaging what we call a climate action leadership team. These are the leaders of several departments at the county so that we can move from a model that indicates that climate action is the work of my small team to instead a model where climate action is the work of the county government and all departments within that government. And so I'm really buoyed by this, this initiative, really excited. We've had one meeting so far. We're essentially going to be talking about the biggest impact projects we can do as a county over the next couple of months. And I'm sure once we kind of land on the final projects that we are going to be teaming up on together, which might include an expanded community climate action grants, as well as several other exciting proposals. And we'll keep you all in the loop as we figure that out. Also look in the next few months for the publication of State of Climate Action Report. This is going to basically walk us through what's been going on with the program the last few years, including the inventories from 2019 to 2022. And then we will publish 2023 separately. And after the fact, probably in end of this year, early next year. The last piece that I will stress is that, every time I'm talking to a group, I want to make sure that folks understand, and this is for all folks who might be viewing this on YouTube after the fact, it is much more important when it comes to climate action that you join with others in community to make some big wins happen in the county, in the city, whatever community you're in, than just buying something different. Eating different food is important, but we need policy to change. Buying a different car is important, but we need corporations to be leading on this work, large corporations. So the sort of movement toward collective action that you all are part of here at Cville 100 is really important, and it needs to be there at the center of our work in this space. So looking forward to your questions tonight, and moving forward, looking forward to just working together with you all as we take this on. All right, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I'm happy to take questions. Mr. Groves.
Yeah, first of all, thank you for the update. I certainly appreciate it, as I expect many others did as well. Quick question of clarification. If I remember correctly, you talked briefly about the Energy Resource Hub.
Yes.
That's the kind of the collaborative tool that you've put together, the city and county.
That's right.
Together, yeah.
Yeah, it's co-funded by the city and the county, and it is co-managed by LEAP, the Local Energy Alliance Program, and the Community Climate Collaborative C3. And so they have hired an energy navigator who, if you call up the number on the website, they will essentially say, okay, what do you want to achieve? Let me walk you through the steps in order to help you achieve that goal, whatever it might be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just a quick comment on that. I know Peter Gates likely heard this. I listened to a city council work session from about a week and a half ago. They were talking about the natural gas system decarbonization plan, but this resource hub came up as a point of discussion, and Councillor Lloyd Snook had very good things to say about it. He certainly is one, I think, who wanted to see this sort of resource and was pleased to see it. I think it's, as I understand it, I think it's a great initial resource, but I do wonder if, and I'm not putting this on your shoulders, but this may be the sort of area where collaboration with the sort of groups that Cville 100 works with, I think there needs to be an even larger information sharing in the community beyond, the specific purchases. But I don't know. I would just say that I think building a greater appreciation in our community of why we all need to come together and do things. So I don't know if there's an opportunity for dialogue more broadly with Cville 100, with others in the community, how to take that as maybe a cornerstone resource in terms of communication, but working together, build out to something more.
I will say I'm open to that conversation if we want to set a time, some special meeting to just think through that and what that might look like. And so I welcome that invitation if that's something you all want to lead on.
Especially with developments at the federal level, I'd say that kind of inspiration is necessary.
Agreed. I just want to pause and say, I don't think I've ever been a part of a call, and so I'm flattered, and hopefully it's not because I spoke too fast or was confusing, that I've seen so many hands raised. Like, what a great engaged group this is. I love it. Tom, we'll go over to you.
Oh, it's my wife, actually.
Hi, Jamie. Thank you. I understand that the Board of Supervisors has not included any funding for climate action in their budget. Is that because they just didn't want to fund it, or did you all not ask for any funding?
So I would be scolded if I spoke about internal budget conversations.
Okay. Well, I'm not trying to make you do that.
So I will just say that your observation is noted, and I do think that making sure to be heard so that.
Well, I plan to write to them, but I was just trying to understand.
Right, sure.
Okay, I will write and express my dismay, okay?
Thanks
And
for the
I
question.
actually have one more question.
Yeah.
You were commenting on the need to increase conservation easements in the county.
Mhm.
I thought I saw in part of the planning department's proposals for the comprehensive plan that there be a limit to the amount of the acreage of easements. I mean, that seems insane and counter to what you're talking about. Am I wrong or?
So I know that the Board of Supervisors is weighing how it believes the county needs to move forward with the program. What I'm sharing tonight is the county climate program's perspective on the value of that of the ACE program.
Right.
And so I can't speak to where we're going to end up, but just to say that from the climate perspective, we need to protect as much land as we can. And easements is one example of how we can get there. Maybe not the only example.
Right.
So that's
Okay. All right. Well, I expressed my concern about that too, and thought that we should work hard to increase the amount of land that's preserved. So anyway, thank you for your thoughts.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Mr. Flightman, did I say that right?
Well, yes, but it's also Fleeman.
Oh, okay.
Two questions. What do you want corporations to do? You pointed out that they will play an important role in reaching these targets, and to get very specific, for the energy hub, I hope that you're briefing all the contractors who work in the county, like those in Waynesboro or Stanton as well, about this resource. Because when we have replaced our gas furnaces in Fairfax 10 years ago or more, it was the contractor who told us about various tax breaks and incentives that we could get if we got a high efficiency furnace. Contractors, I think, are the key link between the energy center and consumers.
I think that's a great point. I appreciate that. And we do engage usually through the chamber or cadre or somebody like that. So broadly speaking, that's how we try most of the time to reach the business community. However, with partners like LEAP, who work a lot with the types of contractors you're talking about, they're always talking up these programs. And, you know, LEAP is part of a network of similar types of nonprofits. And so I think they try to share that out as much as possible. But I can't speak to the, you know, what percentage of that field is getting covered with this messaging. I just don't have an answer for that yet. But your point is well taken, Randy.
And I would just second Randy's point. I think that's a great thing to keep in mind.
100%. Thanks for that. Peter.
Well, I've got two questions. The first, you talked about transportation and agriculture being kind of sticking points in terms of trying to reduce emissions, but how would you also, how would you evaluate the looming increase in energy utilization by military intelligence related companies and you know, perhaps nearby data centers?
Yeah, that's a great point. And it's a challenge. So it's a challenge, and we will see how we are able to confront that challenge through different renewable energy projects, et cetera, state policy, not really sure. I am cognizant, however, that although here it might be more challenging to bring our building emissions down, this is a global challenge, right? And so I think in many parts of the country, they hopefully will have an easier time because they're not as data center happy as we are in Virginia. But yeah, it's a question that remains to be seen. I'm not really sure.
And the second question I have is, have you guys looked at the example of Asheville in terms of how it's recovering from Hurricane Helene? I was intrigued by the slide you showed about the resilience and about reaching a tipping point. I mean, my sort of, I don't know how accurate this is, but from what I've read, my impression is that Asheville is still a long way away from recovery, and there could be permanent damage to their tourism base or even their the residential base. Have you done any kind of, has that provoked any analysis on your team's part in terms of, you know, how this area can learn from that experience?
So one part of the answer is that the city of Charlottesville and the Albemarle County are members of an organization called the Southeast Sustainability Directors Network. And we have colleagues from Asheville who work in sustainability. And so ever since Helene, on all of the calls, like Asheville is a really rich resource to think about what they went through, as painful as it was, and to some extent continues to be. And so that definitely has been part of the conversation. Actually, the annual meeting is coming up in a couple of months, and we anticipate that to be a hot topic. Like, how should we all be thinking about this? The other piece that I would add is that up until Helene, Asheville was considered, I won't go so far as to say they considered themselves, but it was considered a sort of a climate oasis or something like this, right? Like there are some places where the climate crisis is not going to touch. And that has been shown to be untrue, right? And so that's a really important realization for a place like here, so that we don't make any assumptions about whether or not we're going to be impacted by a variety of different hazards, right? For example, wildfire. We know the risk is pretty low here. That doesn't mean it's zero. And so let's be thinking about wildfire risk and what that might mean in our community, right? So a lot more to say about assumptions as we move forward, Peter. Thanks for the question.
Yes,
Do we need to move on, or can we take a few more?
I'd like to, since you're only here once every few months, we've got interest. I think let's go ahead and keep making the rounds. I don't know, perhaps let's go to Bob next.
Mm-hmm.
Couple of questions, and I hope they're compact. Will federal data be available going forward? You said you just have the 2022. Lots of things are being cut.
Mm-hmm.
The ability to get that data end within days. Do you have any heads up on that?
Yeah, I mean, some of it's already gone. And so I don't know. I don't know what's going to be available. I know that a lot of organizations are mindful of this and they are doing their best to make up for the expected gap. Whether they can do so effectively is an open question.
Second question, which you probably will struggle to answer.
Thanks, Bob.
Well, you got to have good questions, you know.
That's right.
Yeah, are the increases in greenhouse gas emissions, do they correlate to increases in population?
So it's a good question. They roughly correlate to increases in population. However, we are expected to grow by another, 15,000, 20,000 people over the next couple of decades. And so we need to break that correlation, right? So even though that is the case, we need to get our per capita emissions under control and diminishing rapidly.
Yes, that's what I was going to lead to, is the per capita emissions.
But here's the trick, and this we're going to see more about this when we get to consumption-based emissions inventory that'll sit next to our normal emissions inventory. A lot of communities just focus on that and say, like if we're making progress on per capita, we're good. But that's not right. It's the community's total emissions that we're trying to bring down. So even if we seem to be good on a per capita, but we're growing faster than expected, we're still not going to make our targets. And the net zero is really what's important. So we'll have to hold both, I think, in our mind.
Third question.
Yes.
During one of the wicked hurricanes in Florida, I guess it was last year, there was one community that was designed for resilience, and it survived almost unscathed because it didn't lose power because they were dependent on solar. The buildings themselves were designed to withstand both wind and flood. The question that I have is, who sets building standards, building codes, so that higher efficiency can be mandated through those building codes?
So the state sets building code in Virginia. Although Charlottesville and other cities might have received authorization from the General Assembly to go beyond building codes, the county, most counties, I think all counties, do not have legislative authority to do that, at least not yet. There are some, incentives that we might be able to offer and be creative about, but it largely rests with the state.
That says to me that as people campaign for the House of Delegates and for the statewide offices, we should press them to commit to taking actions at the state level that will improve our expectations relative to the climate crisis as part of what they promised to do.
I would say in a home rule state, it's really important to focus locally. In a Dillon rule state, you got to split your efforts, local and state, for sure.
Yeah.
Mr. Max.
Thank you for giving us this overview, and maybe I didn't catch that. Maybe you answered this. Apologies if I'm asking something that was already discussed. So if I understand it, you have certain sectors that are very prevalent and certain emitters that are very prevalent. Is there like a list of the top 10, and not to make them public, but is there a list of basically the big emitters that would cover 80 or 90% of emissions, or 60 or 70, and that would be maybe important to address maybe in private policy conversations without making this a public event necessarily? Is there something like that in the region? Do we have big ones?
So it's not something that we look at very closely to figure out individual firms, if I'm understanding the question correctly. I think from my perspective, the answer, knowing that transportation is the biggest chunk of our emissions, for example, what are the policy tools we have in place so that for all firms, you have better transportation choices available to you, right? And so whether you're a big emitter, small emitter, or, your grandma's house, like, we need to think about the messages that are sent by our policies, by our regulations, by our ordinances locally, and make sure that they are incentivizing the right things and disincentivizing the wrong choices. So that's how I look at it. Hopefully that, I know that might be disappointing, but Tom.
Well, I'll just make since we're running a little on, I'll just make a kind of a comment, and I won't expect Jamie to necessarily respond, but I'll say it seems to me that the way humans live now with modern industrial society is pretty directly at odds with kind of a lot of success in terms of curbing a variety of ecological crises that now exist, including climate change. And if we go back about 20 to 30 years ago, Albemarle County was much more actively concerned about long-term sustainability. We had the Sustainability Council, which looked into what would be the parameters or the things we would have to accomplish to coexist with the natural world. In the early 2000s, the county and the city funded research into the numbers of people we could have and still be ecologically sustainable and so on. And a lot of that just went away during the Great Recession and then subsequently. And today the county is much less oriented away from that kind of thing. But in the coming elections, we're going to have at least 2 new supervisors, because 2 supervisors aren't seeking re-election. And then, of course, we have further elections 2 years later. So I think there's a possibility that we get some willingness on the board to take sort of sustainability issues much more seriously, and that may be fed as we have more crises hitting us directly or showing up in the paper. So I think we have to make bigger changes than we can accomplish with the current Board of Supervisors, but I think there are possibilities for broader openings down the road, really starting even in just a year from now. So I think this is a good time to start making certain kinds of changes that are feasible, even in the face of federal government cuts. But possibilities may get better as we go forward for government action anyway. The problems may actually be becoming more acute, but that may make more people aware of them.
Bill, do you have a question for Jamie?
Yeah, I did in the breakout of sectors. My memory, and I could be wrong, is the agricultural was something between 20 and 30%.
That's right, around 22, 23%.
So, yeah. Seems like a pretty hefty amount. Are there county resources directed at helping the agricultural sector change practices that might be more greenhouse gas friendly, that might be better approaches to species preservation and so on? Is there any resources available at the county level for that?
So one point of clarification, that sector is agriculture and forestry. And so actually the bulk of the emissions there are converting forested land to other uses. That's where most of the emissions are coming from, in that 22 to 23%. Okay. And so we've lost about 2,000 acres a year going back to 2006. And so that's something, you know, in part to Tom's point, that we need to kind of address, is this balance between development and conservation. But to your direct question about support for agriculture, there's not a lot that the county does in that space. We usually depend on the Soil and Water Conservation District, Thomas Jefferson, to support producers, along with organizations like the NRCS as part of USDA, and the Ag Extension, which is actually down at 5th Street, Cobb 5th Street. Those are some of the most trusted advisors to producers in terms of changing practices to be more climate smart. However, we are in conversation with the district to see, as part of our adaptation resilience plan, is there something that the county can do more of, or fill a gap that the district is unable to fill because of state regulation or limitations on what they can fund from state money.
Well,
So-
here's a suggestion. It
Yeah.
drives me crazy when I'm biking or driving around and I see houses with these huge lawns. And I know that those were previously horse farms or meadows or something, and now they're just a gigantic lawn. And all I can think of is, God damn it, would you plant some trees, please? So any incentive program the county can offer through nurseries or to homeowners or whatever, to get them to plant trees on those huge lawns, I think would be beneficial.
And this goes to something I mentioned earlier, Randy, where, you know, we have some incentives in the county that make it attractive to make certain decisions and make it unattractive for other decisions. So we need to examine that and make sure we're doing, you know, offering the right incentives for the right behaviors. Well, it looks like we're good. I thank you so much for your time. I'm sorry to the next speaker that we took up so much, but I was really grateful for the engaging conversation.
Thank you, Jamie.
Thank you, Jamie. Thanks so much.
I think everyone appreciated one hearing from you, and good chance for some questions and answers. So I very informative, and I know those who listen later on the recording will also appreciate your comments. So thanks for joining us. You're welcome to stay, although there's still a little light over my shoulder, and so you're welcome to get out and enjoy that before the sun sets here this evening.
I appreciate it, sir. You all have a great evening.